Hey there everybody, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to show you my commander deck for Darien, King of Kjeldor. Pretty interesting commander. His text reads, whenever you're dealt damage, you may put that many 1/1 white soldier creature tokens into play. Meaning, if a creature dealt damage to your life total of, let's say, the equivalent of 5, that means you would put 5 1/1 white soldier creature tokens into play. It's a great way to swarm the field with a lot of 1/1 white soldiers, and it overwhelms your opponents pretty quick. So let's get started onto this deck tech. Alright, so first we're going to start off with the creatures of the deck. Firstly, we got a couple cards that aid with token generation. Precinct Captain, for example, puts a 1/1 white soldier into play whenever it deals combat damage to a player. You know, just some minor token generation for some early game. It's 2 white, so it's nothing too crazy. Next, we got Captain of the Watch. It gives other soldier creatures +1/+1 in vigilance, and it also creates 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Some nice support for soldiers there. We got Requiem Angel. Whenever another non-spirit creature dies, which could also affect, or which also includes your 1/1 white soldiers, you can put a 1/1 white spirit onto the battlefield with flying. So basically, you could turn your 1/1 white soldiers into 1/1 white spirits with flying. That's a pretty good trade for me, just letting them die. Next, we got Knight Captain of Eos. When he enters the battlefield, you can put 2 1/1 white soldiers into play. And then you can sacrifice a soldier. It's for basically a free fog for that turn. It's a great card to get out mid-game, especially when everybody has their stuff out and they're going to start swinging. You could just sacrifice some of the soldiers that you have expendable. Next, we have Benelish Commander. He's a little confusing. So it's basically a creature that comes out with power and toughness equal to the number of soldiers you control. You can play him flat out, and it's a pretty fair trade in and of itself. Or you can suspend him for X. You pay 2 white and X, where X is he comes into play with time counters on it, and you have the option to remove a time counter to put a 1/1 white soldier creature token into play. So if you need more token generation, Benelish Commander could be played for a suspend cost, and yeah, you wind up with more creatures. Next, we get on to some more soldier support. We get a Daru Warchief here, which just makes soldier spells 1 less to cast, and it also gives +1/+2 to soldiers. Now imagine having 30 soldier creature tokens out. It gets pretty crazy. Next, we have Rock's Pike Master. It has first strike, and it gives other soldiers first strike. Preeminent Captain. It has first strike as well, and whenever it attacks, I can put a soldier creature from my hand into play tapped and attacking. It's an easy way to bypass some of the heavier mana costs in the deck. Catapult Master. This is a fun card. So you could tap 5 untapped soldier creatures you control and remove target creature from the game. If you have 5, 10, 30 creatures, soldier creatures on the field, it's pretty easy to almost board wipe a player. So it's definitely it's a must-have for this deck, Catapult Master. Next, we have some of the life gain stuff. Firstly, we have Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, and Suture Priest. All of them pretty much do the same thing, just in slightly different ways. Soul's Attendant and Soul Warden do exactly the same thing for the same cost. Suture Priest, on the other hand, lets you gain a life whenever any creature enters the battlefield under your control, or when it enters under an opponent's control, that opponent loses 1 life. So, more life gain there. As well as Healer of the Pride. It's a little more expensive, but it also reads that you can gain 2 life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control. Now, all of these creatures definitely do a lot of good when you have 6 or 7 creatures entering the battlefield a turn. Next, we have Anointer Priest. It does basically the same thing as Soul Warden, except it only focuses on token creatures entering the battlefield. But that's for you and your opponents, so you can gain a whole bunch of life this way, especially if you're playing other players with token generation. All right, now on to next with just some more support for the deck. Court Street Denizen can tap creatures when a creature enters the battlefield. That's helpful for attacking. Gold Knight Commander gives everything +1/+1 until end of turn when it enters the battlefield, or whenever another creature enters the battlefield. So imagine getting a bunch of tokens out on the same turn. Get a lot of +1/+1s there. Crusader of Odric, its power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control. If you have 30 tokens on the battlefield plus everything else you have, that could be a huge number. So nice card for token generation decks. Onwire Militia Captain does pretty much the same thing. Let me just flip it over for you. Its initial thing says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, which will be most of the time, you can transform her into the Westvale Cult Leader, which reads power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control, same as Crusader of Odric. And you can, at the beginning of your end step, you can put a white and black human cleric creature token into play. It's not a soldier, but it's definitely more token generation to affect the creature buffs that you can get in this deck. Next, we got Frontline Medic. Gives everything indestructible when you attack with stuff. A pretty bog standard card, especially for white decks in general. It's a pretty auto inclusion here. It's not too expensive either. Odric Master Tactician. He has first strike, and whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures plus Odric himself, you choose which creatures block this turn and how those creatures block. It's a nice way to get rid of some creatures. You can have one creature block another big creature, and you can have them kill them, so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of tactics you can do, especially with big creatures. Jazzle Goldmane. It has first strike as well. It seems to be the theme of the deck. A lot of first strike guys, and you could pay 2 white and 3 colorless to give attacking creatures you control +X/+X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. You're attacking with a bunch of soldiers. You're getting a lot of +1/+1 there. Odric Lunarch Marshal, definitely a very powerful commander in and of himself. Basically, if a creature is attacking with flying, every other creature attacking gets flying. If a creature that's attacking has Death Touch, everything has Death Touch. It's a fantastic card to have in this deck, especially when you're going to have so many creatures out and a lot of flyers, a lot of other stuff. Archetype of Courage, again, more first strike. It gives everything first strike. Aegis of the Gods give everything hexproof for a nice cheap card. Bastion Protector is in there to protect Darien. Give it +1/+1 and indestructible. Emiria Shepherd lets you tutor for cards, or cards in your graveyard, rather. You lose something important and it's in your graveyard, just play a land, you can get it back, no problem, as long as it's a non-land permanent. Selfless Squire is a great way to protect against huge amounts of damage coming your way. It has flash, so you can play it at instant speed, and it gets +1/+1 counters for each damage that you would have been dealt that it can block. So if somebody's swinging at you for 10 damage, this card becomes an 11/11. It's a nice cheap little card for 4 mana. Loxodon Gatekeeper. Artifacts, creatures, and lands come into play tapped. That can definitely hinder your opponents in a whole mess of ways. Last but not least, we got Intrepid Hero. It's a great way to get some of those big creatures out of the game. As long as they don't have indestructible, power 4 creators are gone. Alright, now quick before we get into the sorceries of the deck, I wanted to talk about Elspeth real quick. It's the only Planeswalker I have in the deck, but it's a token generator. It's a great way to kill your opponent's larger creatures with that -3. Then her ultimate, that -7, giving you that emblem for the +2/+2 and flying onto everything you control. It's a great win condition. Alright, now onto the sorceries. Neat little proxy here. We got some token generation going on. This Martial Coup lets you put X/1/1 white soldiers into play, and if X is 5 or more, you can destroy all other creatures. So if you can possibly get indestructible on your guys, or at least Darien, it's a pretty great win condition. Start clearing the board for some gnarly attacks. Next, we got Deploy the Front, another token generator. Put X 1/1 white soldiers onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So in general, if everyone's playing token generation, you'll get a lot of tokens. Next, we got Launch the Fleet. Launch the Fleet costs 1 less to cast for each target beyond the first. And it reads, until end of turn, any number of target creatures gain. Whenever this creature attacks, put a 1/1 white soldier creature token onto the battlefield. So, if you got a lot of mana to spend, play Launch the Fleet, just start tapping a bunch of mana, give the white soldiers that ability, and you can just create more tokens that way. It's a great sorcery card. Now, you're not creating soldiers here, but you're creating 4/4 flying angels. Tap any number of untapped creatures you control, and put a 4/4 white angel onto the battlefield for each creature tapped this way. For 7 mana, you can turn your 1/1 soldiers into 4/4 white angel with flying. That's an insane trade. Next, we got Create Justice. Does pretty much the same thing. Unfortunately, you got to pay a little bit more, but it also lets you put white angels into play. You could also cycle it if you need another card or you're hoping for something better. And of course, that bottom ability is as you cycle it, you may pay X and you put 1/1 white soldiers onto the battlefield. So you can either get soldiers or angels, totally up to you. Alright, now on to some of the destruction of the deck. Firstly, we got Hour of Reckoning. You can convoke it to get that casting cost down. Destroy all non-token creatures. It's better if your opponents aren't playing token generation, but even still, you can clear some board with this. Next, we got Mass Calcify. All non-white creatures. As long as you're playing people with other colors, then you got no problem. Last but not least, Fell the Mighty. Destroy all creatures with power greater than target creature's power. So, if you still have those 1/1 white creature tokens on the battlefield, just start destroying anything over one power, and you'll be the only one left standing. All right, now we're on to the instance of the deck. You got Entrapment Maneuver. You get more token generation at instant speed. Target player sacrifices an attacking creature, and you put X 1/1 white soldiers equal to its toughness. You kill a 10/10 creature, like in one of those Darien decks. You start getting some crazy creatures on the battlefield at instant speed. Alright, instants are about protection, so let's get into some of this white protection here. We get the one mana Brave the Elements. You get to choose a color, and every white creature that you control gains protection from that color. It's a great way to save some creatures that would otherwise be dealt some damage. Eerie Interlude is a great card to almost board wipe yourself, but you also get those creatures back. So if something were to board wipe, someone Wrath of Gods you or something like that, play this card. You exile any number of creatures that you control. That could be all your tokens or Darien even, and then you can put it back at the beginning of the next end step, meaning you can pretty much dodge some pretty crazy bullets here. Next, we got Congregate. It's a great life gain card, especially if you have a lot of tokens on the battlefield. Target player, you could choose yourself. Target player gains 2 life for each creature on the battlefield, which is an absolutely crazy thing to do, especially when you have 30 plus tokens on the field. Next, we got some removal. Path of Exile, obviously. Swords to Plowshares, obviously. I put a Condemn in here. Put target creature onto the bottom of its owner's library. It's a great way to get it out, or to get rid of a card without putting it into the graveyard for graveyard recursion. That's pretty much why I put it in there. Last but not least, we got a Return to Dust. It's just artifact and enchantment removal. A lot of artifacts and enchantments in EDH. Just, important to get rid of those. Alright, now we got enchantments. Anointed Procession. If an effect would create one or more tokens, you double that many tokens. This is perfect for Darien's ability. It's perfect for any token generating ability. You can get from 5 to 10, from 10 to 20 tokens. It's a great card for token generation in white. It's a great card. Next, we got Cathar's Crusade. Whenever a creature you would control enters the battlefield under your control, I think I said that twice, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Again, you're creating tokens, a lot of tokens. You're putting a lot of 1/1 counters on everything. Next, we got a Marshal's Anthem. You can kick it. Creatures get +1/+1. That's great. But when you kick it, whenever it enters the battlefield, return up to X target creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times it was kicked. You can return creatures from your graveyard for 1 white and 1 colorless. It's a great card, especially for kicking. Path of Bravery, as long as your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, which I would say half the time it is. A lot of time you're taking damage without a life gain. But creatures you can control get +1/+1, and whenever one or more creatures attack, you gain life equal to the number of attacking creatures. So even if you're down underneath the 40 starting life total, you can get up there pretty quick, especially if you're creating a lot of tokens. Call for Unity. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, put a Unity counter, and for every Unity counter, you get a 1/1 on each creature. It's a great card, especially if you're swinging in constantly with 1/1 soldiers. And you know they're getting swatted down by flies, by bigger creatures. Those tokens are getting bigger and bigger. All right, this is a nice enchantment. It's got flash, so if you're swinging in with some stuff, and you're afraid of blockers, or the blockers are a little bit bigger than you, flash this in. It's an enchantment, so it matters throughout the rest of the game, or as long as the enchantment's on the field. And your creatures get +2/+2. You use it pretty much during combat most of the time, though. Next, we get True Conviction. Creatures you control get double strike and lifelink. Holy cow, this is a great way to get life and deal a lot of damage to your opponents, especially with a lot of creatures. Authority of Consuls. Creatures your opponents control into the battlefield tapped. A great ability in and of itself, but it also gives you 1 life for whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control. So it's a double whammy, especially for 1 mana. This card is absolutely insane. Now for some quieting down on the board here, we got an Aura of Silence. You can pretty much get rid of artifacts and enchantments this way, and it's the same deal with Oblivion Ring. They're pretty much staples in a deck like this. You got to start worrying about those enchantments and those artifacts. All right, next we got the artifacts. A lot of really important artifacts in this deck. So let's start off with Jade Monolith. There's a lot of great synergy with the artifacts in this. As long as you have Darien out, this card is insane. You can pay 1 to direct damage or redirect damage from a creature that you control onto yourself. So if somebody's trying to burn a creature, you can just pay 1, deal that damage to yourself, and if Darien's on the field, you're getting 1/1 tokens for that. Next, we got Jinxed Idol. At the beginning of your upkeep, Jinxed Idol deals 2 damage to you. It basically ensures, as long as you have Darien on the field, that you're getting tokens. And then you can sacrifice a creature to have target opponent gain control of this. So if an opponent's life total is getting pretty low, just sacrifice a creature, move that over to their side, and they'll start taking damage every upkeep. Next, we got Staff of Nin. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can draw a card. So basically, you're drawing 2 cards at the beginning of every turn. So a great way to start thinning your deck, getting those cards you need. And you can also tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. You would more often than not do this to yourself. Deal 1 damage and get a creature token. Alright. Up next, we got Throne of the God Pharaoh. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. If you have a lot of tokens, they all swung in this turn. More often than not, a lot of them are still going to be on the battlefield tapped. And this will deal a lot of damage, especially if you have a lot of tokens. Eldrazi Monument, because Eldrazi Monument gives everything +1/+1 flying and indestructible. You have to sacrifice a creature, but this is token generation. You could sacrifice a 1/1 soldier or whatever. Next, we got Coat of Arms. It gives +1/+1 to each other creature that shares a creature type with it. All your things are 1/1 soldiers. It's going to give all those soldiers +1/+1 for each other soldier on the battlefield. If you have a lot of soldier creature tokens, this is giving everything a lot of +1/+1. Another cool proxy. I got an Chroma's Memorial in here. Creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red. It's just such an insane card. It's almost necessary. It's expensive though, so if you don't have the money, you can't. Next, we got Soul Ring. It's a commander staple. You have to have a Soul Ring. And last, we have a Pearl Medallion. White spells cost 1 less to cast. Everything is a white spell in this deck except for the land and artifacts, of course. So you're pretty much it helps a lot. All right, now onto the mana base for this deck. We have a lot of land that does have some pretty good synergy with Darien. Starting out with Tarnished Citadel, you can tap this card to add a colorless mana, or what you're going to do more often than not is tap it to add a mana of any color, probably a white mana, and it deals 3 damage to you. If you have Darien on the field, that's 3 free counters plus a mana. It's a pretty good little land to have. I would say it's almost necessary. Grand Coliseum does the same thing, except it deals 1 damage to you and it comes in tapped. City of Brass, you can't tap it for colorless, but it'll still deal that 1 damage to you. More token generation. Nomad Stadium, again, the same thing. You can only add a white, but it deals 1 damage to you, and you can threshold it to gain a life as long as you sacrifice it. Late game, that might save you, but you got New Benalia, comes in tapped, but you can scry. This is basically in here just to add a little bit of variety instead of just having a bunch of planes. We got Emiria the Sky Ruin. If you have a lot of planes on the battlefield, this is a great way to get some creature cards back onto the battlefield late game. You know, it brings back creature cards that are in your graveyard. It does enter the battlefield tapped, but you know what? If you're pretty much not using this for token generation, or rather, you're not using this for mana generation. Even though it can generate a white mana, you're more often than not using it for its primary ability to get stuff out of the graveyard. We got a Karu because I like the art, and you can return an untapped planes you control to its owner's hand, or rather, you have to return an untapped planes to its owner's hand, and you create 1 in a colorless every time you tap it. Little bit of ramp there. Forbidding Watchtower. Just, you know, it can become a 1/5 early game if it's your first land on the battlefield. It gives you something to block with, especially if you get a slow start. We get a Command Beacon, so you can get Darien out whenever you want to without paying its mana cost. Especially if Darien's getting killed a lot, this is a great way to get him out onto the battlefield without wasting mana. Reliquary Tower, in case people are making you draw a lot. Blighted Step. It's basically like that card I showed you earlier. For Congregate, that's what it's called. It's basically a Congregate for 4 mana. You have to sacrifice it, but you gain 2 life for each creature you control. Again, you get a lot of creatures, you get a lot of life. Westvale Abbey, because it's the coolest land, I think, ever. I think it's just so awesome. And you're going to have plenty of creatures, so you can sacrifice 5 creatures almost at any time to transform it. And if you don't know what the transform looks like, it turns into Ormadal, Profane Prince, Flying Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste 9/7. Absolutely insane card. I love this card. I think I only got it recently, but it's a great inclusion for this deck. Last but not least, for the interesting lands, we got Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. Again, this is another proxy that I made. I do own the card, of course. And you know, you can create a mana of any color equal to your devotion to that color. You know, it's an easy way to get a lot of mana onto the battlefield. And last but not least, we have the planes. There are, I think, 20 in this deck. I'm not entirely sure, but there are a lot of them. So, of course, you got to have your basic land in this deck. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us for this deck tech of Darien, King of Kjeldor. It's one of my favorite commanders these days. If you can build this deck, I think you can build it on TCG Player, subtracting a lot of the more expensive cards for around $100. It's not too bad for commander decks, but I would pick this deck up if you can.